Welcome to ADEA, the Aristotelian Dental Education Association. You are a part of history here because this has never happened before and it will never happen again. But it's difficult to talk about virtue and not talk about Aristotle, who is the father of virtue ethics. I want to go back to 1997 when Rick joined AADS as executive director. In the program that you have, the first thing that's mentioned in that timeline is the release of the proceedings from Leadership for the Future, the dental school and the university. Things were different back then. If you might recall, between 1983 and 1996, 6 dental schools closed. In 1998, one of the most storied dental schools announced its closing. The Institute of Medicine said that dental education was at the crossroads. So AADS decides to have a summit conference to bring university administrators together with dental school deans to talk about the future of dental education. A lot of people thought that was a very bad idea. But it wasn't a bad idea. It turned out to be a seminal event. 47 of 55 dental school deans showed up. They brought 42 senior administrators with them. The Leadership Summit Conference launched the ADEA Center for Educational Policy and Research. It initiated the Leadership Institute. It planted the seed for the Commission on Change and Innovation in Dental Education. And it opened a new dialogue about the value of the dental school to the parent university and to other health professions. It wasn't a disaster, it was a seminal event. I mentioned that in opening because that's where Rick started out, and it shows virtue in the career of an association executive early in his career. It took courage to move forward when people were saying stop or pivot. It took perseverance to stay the course. And it also took practical wisdom. Practical wisdom to see that this dialogue was important for leadership to the future. So I want to talk about this morning 2 specific virtues relative to virtuous leadership: practical wisdom and justice. But before I go there, let's look further at the concept of virtue. So yes, I will quote Aristotle. In his Nicomachean Ethics, he defines virtue this way. He says it's a state of character concerned with a choice that's relative to us as determined by reason. That is, as the person of practical wisdom would determine it. Now that's Aristotle's run-on sentence, it's not mine, but that's what he calls virtue. And there's several things that I want to point out about this definition of virtue. First of all, it's about a life of action. It's about doing things. If I do the same thing over and over again in the same circumstances, sooner or later they become a habit. Habits that are good for us are virtues. Habits that harm us are vices. Secondly, habits are about character. So when I do something, I'm not only taking an act, I'm not only doing something, I'm actually becoming someone. Aristotle recognized that. Secondly, how do we know what to do? Life is confusing, right? That's just where reason comes in, and this is where practical wisdom comes in. Practical wisdom is developed through experience. It's developed in lots of ways, but one of the interesting things about the way Aristotle defines virtue is he points to the person of practical wisdom. The person of practical wisdom is a moral paradigm, an exemplar from whom we learn. And I want to suggest to you that the virtuous leader is that type of paradigm, that type of exemplar. We look at that leader and we learn about leadership by watching his or her example of leading. So when I talk to you about practical wisdom and justice this morning, I'm going to share some observations with you about things that I have seen in observing a leader, a virtuous leader. First of all, as you think about practical wisdom, wisdom and practical wisdom is distinguished from philosophical wisdom. Practical wisdom is about means and ends. So the ends are the goals. How do I get to those goals? I've noticed 3 things, observed 3 things as expressions of practical wisdom and virtuous leaders. First of all, it's a bias for action. A bias for action. I like what the late Herb Kelleher, founder of Southwest Airlines, said when someone said, "Do you have a strategic plan?" I don't know if you've heard this before. Somebody asked him, "You have a strategic plan?" Herb Kelleher says, "Yeah, we have a strategic plan. It's called doing things." IDEA has moved nimbly over the years because of leadership that balanced the need to gather information and build consensus with a realization that you have to act to take advantage of the opportunity. Secondly, another observation about virtuous leaders and practical wisdom. If you want to be wise, surround yourself with sages. Knowing that you don't know, having a sense of curiosity, being able to learn and willing to learn, listening to others is the fountain of practical wisdom. IDEA's benefited from leadership that listened to the board, that listened to the staff, that listened to others and gathered that wisdom from others. For the third thing that I've observed, I'm going to tell you a quick story. It's a story about Johann Sebastian Bach. During his lifetime, Bach wrote 300 cantatas. Nowadays, if a composer writes a couple cantatas a year, he or she is considered prolific. Bach ended his manuscripts, many of his manuscripts or compositions, with 3 words: Solo Deo Gloria, or sometimes simply SDG, to the singular glory of God. Now, my story is not a theological one. My story is about passion, almost passion so deep that it's hard to express. Bach didn't have a vocation, he had a calling. And I've noticed in virtuous leaders that same sense of calling. So the third practice that I've seen is this melding of wisdom and passion to something that's akin to or tantamount to zeal, religious zeal, but the good kind of religious zeal. It's tantamount to a calling. So let's turn to justice. As an author of a book on virtuous leadership, I am frequently approached by people who say, you know, so-and-so's a leader, and they're not particularly just, or they're not particularly virtuous. Well, you know, nobody's perfect, right? That's not my response, but nobody's perfect, even virtuous leaders. My response is that all leadership isn't virtuous leadership. If there's one virtue that I think is really central, necessary for virtuous leadership, it's justice. There are 4 cardinal virtues. Leo mentioned them: courage, temperance, prudence, practical wisdom, and justice. Cardinal from the word cardo, which means hinge. These are the 4 hinges on which the whole of a good life swings. Justice is a key hinge on which virtuous leadership swings. So I like to think of justice as the outward-looking virtue. So I can be courageous in respect to myself, I can be temperate in respect to myself, but I can't be just in relation to myself. I can only be just in relation to other people. Virtuous leaders understand that. Now, justice is a very complicated concept. I want to look at just 2 very specific things relative to justice. One is justice as fairness. This could be called transactional leadership. So it's a transaction between the leader and the follower. You work, you get paid. I hear people say that I'm more than fair as a leader. Well, that's good, because anything less than fair is being unjust. But transactional leadership, justice as fairness, is a minimum standard. Virtuous leaders go beyond that. Virtuous leaders go to what I would call thriving, or as Pam mentioned, flourishing. And they do that by creating an environment where people can flourish. They create environments where people can experience autonomy to create and to contribute. They create environments where people can develop mastery. They just become better at what they're doing. And they also create environments where people experience purpose and contribute to purpose. So let me talk about 3 observations, again, practices that I've seen in a virtuous leader. The first one is building a purpose-driven organization. In 2002, I was on the President's Commission for the role of academic dental institutions in providing access to care. And one of the premises in that report, you'll also see that in the timeline, one of the premises in that report was that health, and by implication oral health, should not be treated as a marketplace commodity. Health was necessary for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, oral health was necessary. And in a good society, people have a right to health. Now, what did that do? That pointed me, and it pointed others, that the real mission of IDEA is the health of individuals and communities. And I thought it was fascinating to see that reflected in the new vision statement. Secondly, virtuous leaders develop potential. All of you are educators, and you know what that is. That's what academic dentistry does. We take students, they come in, and we develop their potential to become health professionals. And if we're really successful, not only do they develop the skills, but they develop the values and the attitudes of a health professional. 1997 marked a significant change in the history of the association because of its turn to developing people, developing the members. There are literally thousands of dental educators who are better leaders and better teachers because a leader of an association saw this not simply as an association service, but as a duty demanded by justice. The third practice, I have to tell you a story. So I was hired in 1998 by the association, by Rick, to do a search for the Director of Educational Policy and Research. And Rick and I were in a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and we were going over the job description, and I said, I could do this. Now, I don't know why I said that, and the truth is, I wasn't qualified to do it. And he said, so why don't you? And that's why I'm standing here now. The third practice is that virtuous leaders create opportunities for others. And there are many, many people in this room right now for whom Rick Valachovic has opened doors. There are many people in this room that have been introduced to others. There are many people in this room who owe much of their careers to Rick's mentorship and his advising and his help along the way. That's what virtuous leaders do. So there you have it. 2 of the hinges, practical wisdom and justice, on which virtuous leadership swings. In conclusion, I'll tell you another quick story and read you a quote. So last year I had the privilege of retreating to the Arizona desert with a group of dental deans, retired dental deans, and other dental leaders, including Rick. And by the way, when I say retreating to the Arizona desert, I do mean the Ritz-Carlton. We spent most of a day discussing an essay by the Roman Stoic Seneca. And the essay is entitled On the Shortness of Life. And as I was thinking about this celebration, I want to read something that we discussed, again, in Rick's presence. Seneca makes this observation. He says, so you must not think a man has lived long because he has white hair or wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long. It's not that we have a short time to live, but we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were well invested. So Rick, as Leo has noted, this is not your eulogy, not your memorial service, but I want to thank you for time well invested, and I want to thank you for your example of virtuous leadership.